Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden to discuss some of the biggest stories from around the hockey world, and there are a ton right now. Steele, since the last time we talked 2 weeks ago, the Seattle Kraken built their roster. The next wave of prospects were taken by their new NHL teams. A bunch of free agents got paid, and there are a ton of trades to digest as well. Before we get into some of the specifics, this has already been the busiest offseason I can remember, and probably the most entertaining as well. What's been your overall impression? And is this activity good for the game?
Yeah, I think it's great for the game, and I'm right there with you. I think this has been the best offseason / free agency of my lifetime, and I think a lot of people can say the same thing. Just with the expansion draft, those players getting picked up, the NHL draft as well, and then the free agents and all the trades going on. So, it's, like you said, it's been a busy week and a half, especially for the Seattle Kraken trying to get their inaugural season going 2021-22. There's a lot of big names. We're going to see a lot of guys on new teams. The NHL is going to look a lot different next year. Guys like Dougie Hamilton going to the Devils for 7 years. The Kraken signing for 6 years. That came out of left field. They found themselves a true number one goalie for the Seattle Kraken there. But again, them going to the Flames, who just won back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Zach Hyman with the Oilers for 7 years. A lot of these big guys, big names are going and finding new teams, and it's going to be a new look next season for sure for a lot of these clubs, and I'm all here for it. I think this has been one of the best off seasons that I've seen, and I think it's a great look for the NHL, and it's been great activity as well.
Yeah, I feel for the teams and their fans that lost some of their favorite players, but I think overall, you're right. This is great for generating excitement around the league. And I think teams in their window of contention should be going for it. And for the most part, we saw a lot of that. And struggling teams like the Sabres and Coyotes, they're doing the right thing by rebuilding here. They weren't going to be contending anytime soon. And sometimes you have to take that step or two back to move forward there in the future. But as you mentioned, a lot of big moves for some of those contending teams. And we're going to look at 5 of them today, comparing the team building philosophies of a few teams that obviously consider themselves playoff contenders. We'll find out if you agree with that or not. Specifically, the Leafs, Oilers, Blackhawks, Rangers, and Hurricanes. So let's start in Edmonton. We discussed Oilers GM Ken Holland trading for Duncan Keith and extending Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on our last episode. So tune into that if you haven't heard that before. But he stayed busy as well after that. He lost Adam Larson to Seattle in the expansion draft. Edmonton extended Tyson Barrie for 3 years with an annual average value of $4.5 million. And then they signed Cody Ceci to a 4-year deal with a $3.25 million AAV. Of course, they extended your boy Mike Smith to a very reasonable 2-year deal at $2.2 million per year. I don't even think you can argue with the value on that one. And then exchanging Ethan Bear for Warren Fogle from Carolina and signing Derek Ryan to a 2-year deal with a $1.25 million AAV. So that forward core around Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl definitely got a lot deeper than it was last season. You mentioned his name as well. Holland went big game hunting, handing former Leafs favorite Zach Hyman a 7-year deal with a $5.5 million AAV. You can't fault Holland for making drastic changes to a team that fell short big time last year. That was an extremely disappointing end to their season, getting swept there in the playoffs. But you could argue that he was overly aggressive on a couple of fronts, and he still really hasn't addressed their goaltending. Overall, though, have you liked the Oilers' offseason strategy so far?
No, you just talked about it a little bit right there. They addressed the problems up front with their forward core. You know, always signing Zach Hyman to that 7-year deal at $5.5 million, re-signing Nugent Hopkins as well, and then acquiring a guy like Warren Fogle who fills in some gaps on the bottom 6 forwards there. So they made they did address some issues they had up front, but to be honest, I think they got worse on the blue line, and I think they got worse in the crease. You know me as well as anybody does. I am not a Mike Smith fan, and he's not the type of goalie that's going to win you playoff series and win you playoff games. You need to change it up, and I am hearing that the Oilers are looking at Jonas Korpisalo of the Columbus Blue Jackets, but that would acquire the Edmonton Oilers sending a first-round pick, Mikko Koskinen, and a prospect in the process. So I think that's something to look that maybe we can keep our eye on. They would need a true number one goalie. Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen not going to get the job done. Obviously, they go out and get Duncan Keith and Cody Ceci, as well as a couple of other players in the bottom six, and then re-sign Tyson Barrie. I don't think their blue line is anything special. Besides Darnell Nurse and Tyson Barrie at times, there's nothing special about this blue line. So once again, it's gonna depend on Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and hopefully Zach Hyman can be a little bit of a production up front as well for them. But it's going to depend entirely on their forwards right there, especially on Connor McDavid's shoulders.
I agree with you there. In the short term, I think their forward core is definitely improved. Hyman's deal could get a little bit ugly as it goes on, but I don't think they're worried about 6-7 years down the line. They're worried about the next few years and keeping that big two happy. Now, I already mentioned I thought the Keith trade was an overpay, and I seriously hope there's still a goalie addition to be made, because I've said all along, I like Mike Smith. $2.2 million for a really good backup goalie is not bad. But right now, he's their number one starter. They don't have a number one guy, and they desperately need one. And, you know, it's funny, the goalie market was almost flooded this year in a way that I don't think we've seen in a really long time. And somehow the Oilers came away with nobody. That to me was really surprising. Let's go over to Toronto here. GM Kyle Dubas voiced his belief in the Leafs' current core, and he went the opposite strategy to Edmonton. Losing Hyman hurts Toronto a lot. But let's be honest, the money just wasn't there to compete with the Oilers' offer. Seattle scooped newly acquired Jaron McCann in the expansion draft, and Dubas went bargain hunting again, similar to last offseason, to fill out their forward core and add some blue line depth. Forwards Curtis Gabriel, David Kampf, former Coyote and hometown boy Michael Bunting, a pair of former Bruins in Andre Kasha and Nick Ritchie, all signed 1 or 2 year deals. Now, to put this into perspective, the combined cost of those players is $6.95 million next year, or $1.45 million more than Edmonton is paying Hyman alone. So when you look at all those spots that the Leafs had to fill, it becomes pretty clear Hyman was just not going to stay around there. Now, Toronto also added a trio of depth defensemen on cheap two-way contracts, but their big move actually came between the pipes, letting Frederik Andersen walk and signing Hurricanes goalie Peter Mrazek to a 3-year deal with a $3.8 million AAV. Toronto may have one of the league's best tandems between the pipes. They surrounded their core 4 players with other guys on cheap contracts. What I liked is they went significantly younger than they did last season, with some of those veteran guys that just didn't pan out or seemed to kind of lose a step even more as they got to the playoffs. And they really didn't do much on the back end, which frankly, I was a little bit surprised about. So do you believe in the Leafs core as much as Kyle Dubas does? And did he surround them with the right pieces?
I just want to reiterate how much of a great job Kyle Dubas has done once again in the offseason, trying to fill in those gaps. Obviously, Zach Hyman wasn't able to give him the money that he was looking for with obviously those big contracts that he gave out a couple of years ago to Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Tavares, obviously. So that one was tough for him, obviously losing a guy like Hyman. But I think he made some right decisions here. You know, he gets a guy like Michael Bunt, like you said, those 5 guys on that all add up to $6.9 million. It's outstanding. You get a guy like Michael Bunting, guys like Andre Casse, Nick Ritchie, some big tough guys who can play that dirty game that Zach Hyman played as well. So that's what I really love about Kyle Dubas as well. And then again, in the goal increase, he's sticking with his guns with Jack Campbell and gets a guy like Peter Mrazek, who I absolutely love. I love this tandem that we have right now in the crease. The one issue I do have is that he didn't address anything on the blue line. I don't think Travis Dermott should be in the lineup. I don't think he's an NHL caliber defenseman. I don't trust a guy like that. He made a lot of mistakes in the playoffs, and I think he's a very selfish player in the defensive zone. So I think he should have made some adjustments on the blue line. But other than that, that's my small issue right here that I have with Kyle Dubas. But to answer your question, do I believe as much as Kyle Dubas in their core, in those top 4 guys? And the answer is no, I don't. I think Kyle Dubas, in order for the Toronto Maple Leafs to actually be considered a top contending team for the Stanley Cup year in and year out, they have to trade one of those guys, and that guy's name is William Nylander. That guy has to go. As much as a great and talented hockey player that he is, having 4 guys that you're over 3 guys over 10 million, and then the 4th William Nylander 7 million practically. You're not going to win champions. You're not going to win champions like that. You're not going to Stanley Cup like that. You need to make sure that your entire roster is playing the right way and set up that you can play as a team, and that's just not how they play. That's not how William Nylander plays. He's a talented forward, but he doesn't do much else besides scoring goals. And you need help on the defense, and you need to be making sure that you're doing all those little things to help your team out. And when I saw him in the playoffs, even though he was scoring goals, he was probably one of the best forwards out there. He wasn't doing the little things to help him out in the defensive zone and in the neutral zone. So I don't believe as much as Kyle Dubas is in the top 4 guys, and I think William Nylander needs to be traded so they can address the problems on the blue line.
I mean, it's hard in Dubas's position because I feel like there were more depth forwards, which he definitely got quality guys. I think Toronto fans are going to love Nick Ritchie, and he's the kind of player that fans have been clamoring for this team to get. He hits anything that moves. He's exactly what this team needs. Like you mentioned, they didn't really go for the high-end guys. They went for someone in the second, third line that can really play some solid hockey. But yeah, that blue line, they're just not cutting it for me either. And I think they're hoping that their excellent goaltending duo can kind of make up for some of those deficiencies on the back end. But we all saw last playoffs, that wasn't the case. So Dubas believes, I think this team is on the clock now, frankly. If it doesn't work out this year, I do believe one of those 4 players will get traded next year. So huge season for that Leafs core coming up ahead. Let's move over to Carolina now. Maybe the best team of this quintet last season. But I would say they've lost the most talent so far of all of these 5 teams this offseason. The Hurricanes lost Morgan Geekie in the expansion draft and then dealt the presumed target in that draft by many experts, young defenseman Jake Bean, to Columbus for a 2nd-round pick. And then what was maybe the most lopsided trade of the offseason, the Canes sent Calder finalist and homegrown goalie Alex Nedeljkovic for what amounted to just a 3rd-round pick. And in one last kick to an already down Canes fan base, star defenseman Dougie Hamilton, like you mentioned, signing that monster 7-year deal with the New Jersey Devils. Now, Carolina's plan did start to come into focus a little bit at the draft. They made 13 selections, which actually tied an NHL record for the most ever in 1 year. They signed a handful of promising young players who have mostly AHL experience, minimal time in the NHL, except for a notable trio. The Canes jumped on 2 of the last available goalies, paying Frederik Andersen $9 million and Antti Raanta $4 million over the next 2 seasons. And they're hoping a reclamation project can fill a suddenly huge hole on their blue line, signing former Ranger Tony DeAngelo to a 1-year, $1 million prove-it deal. Now, they also added some more depth on the back end, giving Ian Cole $2.9 million next season as well. I really don't want to trash this organization because I have a feeling they're going to make anyone who does look bad. They've proven time and again they're great talent evaluators. They're good team builders. They have a great core of young players, an awesome coaching staff. And when I looked a little bit closer at the underlying numbers of some of those young players who, frankly, I hadn't heard of or heard much about before, I do think some of those young signees are promising, and maybe they can be contributors on some cheap contracts. But this is the one fault that I find with this plan. Andersen and Raanta are 2 of the most injury-prone goalies recently. And although Mrazek struggled with injury last season, Nedeljkovic is promising but unproven. The goalies who left are way better than the ones who joined. Carolina is a perfect market for DeAngelo to get another opportunity, kind of away from the public eye, not under the pressure, but man, I feel like Carolina is going to take a major step back next season unless there are more moves to come. Where do you land on all this?
In agreement with you here. They took, as much as a contender they still are, they took a step back this year, especially with Dougie Hamilton leaving them. And Tony DeAngelo is not the type of guy who's going to fill Dougie Hamilton's shoes on that blue line. No way he does. So they lost a lot on the blue line. They're still pretty much the same up front, you know, especially called Aho, Jordan Stahl, Vincent Trocheck. Luckily for them, you know, Niederreiter wasn't taking the expansion draft, so they're still pretty set up front as well. But on the back end and on the in the crease, just they took a big step back. And like you said, like that trade for Jonathan Bernier, a 3rd-round pick for Nedeljkovic, was just mind-boggling. This guy could be your future starting goaltender for years to come, and you're trading him for Jonathan Bernier, a 3rd-round pick. It just didn't make any sense. And then, you know, when things kind of started coming to fruition towards the end of free agency, they get Frederik Andersen, they get Antti Raanta, and you make a great point there. Both those guys are injury prone. And can they prove it? Anderson didn't prove it with the Maple Leafs. Obviously, Ronson didn't really prove it with the Arizona Coyotes, even though he is really, really good goalie. He didn't really prove it when it came down to it. So just the decisions they made leading up to the free agency and signing those guys last minute, it just seemed a little bit just like we need something really quick, and they just had to get something done. So for me, I think they should have tried to. They should have stuck with Nedeljkovic, let Mrazek and Reimer go, obviously, but it's unfortunate that they take a step back. They're still a Stanley Cup contending team, but just not one of the top fives for me right now.
And you know what? Even if they wanted to let Mrazek go and bring Anderson in, they said they wanted more veteran, guys in net. I get that. Nedeljkovic is unproven, and obviously they didn't think he was a number one goalie. But with what he signed for in Detroit and what they got back, why not just keep him as the backup to Anderson, a guy who just continuously gets injured, who needs somebody who's behind him? That to me makes no sense. It's fine if you want to let Mrazek go, but to let Nedeljkovic leave, I don't know. If I was a fan of the Hurricanes, it would take me a long time and a lot of winning to get over that. That's for sure. Let's move over to D'Angelo's former team in New York, who have had maybe the most unique offseason so far. After Washington brute Tom Wilson came in and wreaked havoc to end last season, New York went a route I expected the Leafs to go. They got bigger, tougher, and harder to play against. They sent Vegas a third rounder in next year's draft for Wilson's mortal enemy and maybe the most feared player in the league, Ryan Reeves. And then they extended him for another season as he entered the final year of his current deal. I mean, I'm going to tune in to every single game between these two teams. It's going to be absolutely unbelievable. I can't wait to see it. They moved talented winger Pavel Buchnevich to the Blues for energetic and physical young winger Sammy Blais, and they signed an excellent third line player to maybe the biggest contract I've ever seen for someone of his caliber, inking Barclay Goodrow for the next 6 years with a $3.6 million AAV after sending Tampa a 7th rounder for him. Now, Patrick Nemeth and Jared Tenorti shore up the bottom of their defensive depth chart. Not much to write home about there, but two solid bottom pairing guys on short-term deals. Steele, New York is undoubtedly a tougher team than they were last year. Are they a better team, though?
Rangers are one of the top teams in the NHL next season. I'll be shocked. It just like, for me, high on them last year, and I'm even higher on them this year. Alexi Lafreniere needs to come out this season and show us why he was the number one pick a couple seasons ago. They got Barclay Goodrow. They signed him up for 6 years. They got Ryan Reeves on the fourth line. So they get tougher. They get bigger. You have the reigning Norris Trophy winner, Adam Fox. He did an amazing job last year with the New York Rangers. And then to top it all off, they have Igor Shesterkin and Alexander Gorgiev. Two guys who, in my opinion, have the potential in this league of being a difference maker for years to come. And they can be one of the best goalies in years to come as well because of how high their ceiling is. So for me, I'm really high on the New York Rangers. And they're in my top five teams for this upcoming season. They have to be. I was so high on them last year, and they just got better this year. I think a lot of it, they had a lot of problems going last year. Obviously, they were a very young team. Panarin had to leave us for some personal reasons. Mika Zibanejad was injured for a little bit as well. So they had some problems going on last year. Just didn't add up, especially with Alexi Lafreniere just not getting off to a great start and having a terrible first season. But hopefully he can come out here in his second season and show us why he was the number one pick. But I've got super high hopes for the New York Rangers this upcoming season.
I don't know if I'm willing to go that high on the Rangers, but I do have to admit, I love what they did this offseason. They went a different direction. It's really hard for a team, especially a team like New York. It's extremely exciting to watch. They're really young. I do feel like there was still some patience with them. I feel like fans would have waited another season or two for them to be really ready to be contenders, but they obviously think, just like you do, that this core is ready to compete right now. And I have to admit, I'm excited to see what they look like because they're going to be a completely different team than they were last season. Last but not least, let's finish off with the Blackhawks seal. Their blue line looks a whole lot different. I mean, it's crazy, really. We mentioned Duncan Keith's trade. Completely changed. That brought in Caleb Jones. Chicago then traded for Caleb's brother Seth from Columbus for a huge haul, sending young D-man Adam Boquist, the 8th overall pick just 3 years ago, trading the 12th pick in this year's draft for the 32nd pick, a 2021 second rounder, and their first round pick in 2022. Then they went ahead and broke the internet by making Seth Jones the third highest paid defenseman in the league, signing him for 8 years and 76 million big ones. That's $9.5 million per season for those of you who do not have your calculators out right now, for close to a decade. That's insane money. Chicago recouped a second rounder from Tampa along with Tyler Johnson for the rights to Brent Seabrook. And I read this a couple of times. I consider myself pretty good at math, but somehow this move gave both teams more cap space. So go figure. I don't understand how that can possibly happen. But Seabrook, of course, will be on LTIR for the remaining 3 years of his contract. Earlier that same day, though, they acquired reigning Vezina winner Marc-Andre Fleury from Vegas for Mikael Hakkarainen, a prospect who was taken in the 5th round 5 years ago. He has never played an NHL game. And guess what? He had a whopping 0 points in 14 AHL games last year. Fleury found out about the deal on Twitter and did not immediately commit to play in Chicago, but he confirmed on August 1st he will in fact report to Chicago, which means they got one of, if not the best goalie last year for basically nothing. So go figure. Carolina, Edmonton, they did absolutely nothing to address their goaltending. Chicago, who already had a great young goalie in Kevin Lankinen, gave up nothing for one of the best veteran goaltenders in the league. Steele, it's obvious the Hawks want to make a push here while Patrick Kane is still one of the league's elite players. We haven't even mentioned Jonathan Toews' hopeful return could provide a big boost to them, as well as Kirby Dach. Should Chicago have gone all in on this team, in your opinion? And did they make the right moves to put themselves back in contention?
They made the best moves. They had the best offseason compared to every of the other teams in the NHL. They were the ones who hit the jackpot here with all these signings, all these trades that they made, and they escaped in the expansion draft as well, with Seattle picking Quenneville from them. So they got lucky there as well, like the Carolina Hurricanes did. But yeah, they made the right moves. They got the right players, and this is the time where they need to go full out, because they've been saying it for years. We don't want to be going in a rebuild stage. We don't want to be a rebuild. We want to be going for the Stanley Cup every single year. And they proved that with this offseason. You look at the first line, they've got Alex DeBrincat, Kirby Dach, and Patrick Kane. You get your captain back in Jonathan Toews, and he's playing with Dylan Strome as well. So they've got a bunch of great talented forwards as well as veteran forwards in Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews in their top six, in their top two lines. So that right there settles it alone. They have great depth players in their bottom six forward course. And then, like you just mentioned, their entire defense has changed. Like, if you looked at it from a couple of years ago, or even last year, they've got 4 new guys there. And Seth Jones alone, just what an absolute contract that is for him. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about what Cale Makar might get. Cale Makar is only getting $9 million. That's surprising. If Seth Jones is getting 9.5, I think Cale Makar should probably make close to 11 then. But that's just me. That's just how good he is. But again, they made some great acquisitions there. They get Tyler Johnson. Like I said, they practically have an entirely new defense there. Seth Jones and Caleb Jones now being on the same team. And then they get the reigning Vezina trophy, who they traded for basically a bag of pucks, a bag of potatoes. It was just honestly uncanny and just mind-boggling that when that trade went through. And especially for Marc-Andre Fleury to see it on Twitter, man, Vegas has done him dirty since they got him in his expansion draft. So I don't know what the heck's going on over there, but yes, I think Chicago was the best team so far in this offseason in the free agency. And they did a great job. So I think it is the right decision to go out. And just before I hand it back over to you, I don't know if you saw what Phil Forsberg had to say about his former teammate Seth Jones, but he commented saying, he's like, "Oh, you want to come back to our division? Let me expose you real quick." So I'm really excited to see Phil Forsberg against Seth Jones. That'd be an interesting matchup, Nashville against Chicago. But yeah, I think Chicago did a great job this offseason.
I agree with you. I don't know if this team is going to be good enough to win another championship, but I do like the fact that they're willing to try. When you have a talent like Patrick Kane, who is still one of the best forwards and best scorers in the game right now, and you mentioned how much better and how much different that defense got. We talked about all these other teams that couldn't find a defender to save their life or had to overpay for a guy that is probably over the hill at this point, Chicago went out and got multiple young defensemen. And, you can argue all day whether you think it was an overpay for Jones, and it probably was, when you think of what they traded and what they ended up paying him. But that's just the price of business. If there's only 2 or 3 really good number one defensemen available, you're going to have to pay up for them. And that's exactly what Chicago did. And then we look at what happened with Seabrook going on LTIR, them being able to trade him out, getting an asset in return, Duncan Keith shipping him out, get a prospect and a pick in return. Everyone was talking about how terrible the Keith and the Seabrook contracts were going to look at the end. And guess what? Chicago went and got assets for both of them. So I don't think this Seth Jones contract is going to be nearly as bad as people think that it's going to be. But that's all the time that we have today. You mentioned some interesting stuff about the Vegas Golden Knights, and we're going to talk about them on another episode because I'm going to need a lot more airtime to air some grievances with them. But that's going to do it for today's episode. On behalf of Steel Roden, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.